G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. Dreamtime at the G is here, one of the biggest nights on the AFL calendar, one of the biggest games on Essendon's calendar, and this year it comes with a very different sort of pressure attached to it. Last week against Fremantle felt like one of those games where the final margin almost flattered us. Once again, poor starts, contest issues, and an inability to handle pressure around the ball left us chasing the game from far too early. And yet somehow, despite all the frustration, hysteria and noise, Dreamtime still has a way of cutting through it all, a night where we get to celebrate the contribution so many incredible Indigenous players have made to our club and our game. Tonight we'll dig into the Fremantle loss, the latest media storm around Essendon's list strategy, the mounting injury concerns, and what we expect to see against the Tigers. I'm Jonathan Walsh, and joining me as always is my co-host, Adrian Humey. How's things, mate?
Hey there, Jono. Doing well here. Good to see you. But look, I really think we've missed a trick. We were just celebrating our 100th match preview the other week and didn't decide to monetize it to within an inch of its life. And, we could have sold gold microphones. You could have worn 10 different jumpers that we could then flog at an auction. Clearly, you and I are very bad capitalists. We're 97 match previews off preview 200, so at least we've got some planning time, so we can really start raking in the cash there.
Yeah, I actually walked out today from the office to get some lunch in Richmond and saw a big Scott Pendlebury billboard across the East Richmond station there. So I mean it's an incredible feat, isn't it, to play that many games of AFL footy? But it's been done to death a little bit. So yeah, I think we're right, mate. Maybe we can, after the popularity of the Nick Martin pajamas, maybe we can bring out our own range there.
Yeah, potentially. We'll have to probably do some profit sharing with Nick, given that they'll be so successful there. Before we do get on to reviewing the Fremantle game, I want to say a big thanks to Jeremy Walsh. I'm not sure if that's a relation of yours there, Jono, for signing up to the Patreon this week. As always, the chat has been going great guns. A lot of people contributing their own insights and data, particularly Josh Wilson, who did some really in-depth breakdowns on what fell apart during the Fremantle game. So thanks to everyone who's been making it such a great place to be. I also want to give a big shout out to Craig McGill for joining me for the second episode of Craig's List, which this week was counting down our top 5 Essendon heartbreaks. You can check that out on our Patreon as well, and a link is in the description of this episode if you'd like to join the community.
Yeah, no relation. There's no shortage of Walshes around, mate. There's plenty of them. But thanks, Jeremy, for jumping on board. And great job, you and Craig again. It was a good listen, and the community's getting stronger and stronger. And I think it's also a real happy escape from the hysteria of AFL media landscape, and then also social media, where there's a lot of sensationalism and carry on. Whereas I think there's a lot of healthy debate, and people don't necessarily always agree with us or each other, but it's always respectful. And I learn a lot out of it too, mate. So it's been lots of fun to be part of.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, let's do it. Let's get stuck into reviewing the Fremantle clash. And I think the thing that stood out to me most, and I think I mentioned this in the first thoughts that I recorded when I was on the train home flicking through the AFL app, if you looked at the team stats and you sort of scrolled down there and you ignored the score, you would come out of that thinking it was a pretty even contest. So there were a few areas where either team really had an advantage in any of the main statistical measurements. But when it mattered, particularly in the opening part of the game, we were nowhere near it, and it was clear the gap between one of the top sides and us was evidence for all to see.
Yeah, we've certainly started to even things up from about halfway through the second quarter. In fact, we broke even from that point on. It was 7-9, 51 to 8-3, 51 from Paddy Voss's second goal in that second quarter, which was 13 minutes into it. We had 30 more disposals, 22 more contested possessions, 21 more ground balls, 10 more forward 50 ground balls, and 5 more scoring shots. I kind of reckon if you reversed it, and I know the game's not that simple, and I know the game situation changes and Fremantle's attitude towards the game changes because of it. But had we held our own for 2.5 to 3 quarters and Fremantle ran over the top of us and won by 6 or 7 goals, I think most would accept it. But giving up a fast start really isn't acceptable. That's where you should be the most switched on. You should be at your most fierce at the contest, and we weren't able to do that.
Yeah, you're right there. And as you say, right from the beginning, it happened. It was at the first bounce. I was sitting on the Warn stand wing up on level 4 and saw Zach Merritt line up on Frederick at the opening bounce, only for Merritt to immediately run off him into the contest. And that left Frederick there, from which he was able to impact on all 3 of Freo's opening goals, ending with the one in which he kicked himself after standing free in the inside 50. So clearly there was some sort of plan here involving Merritt and getting him into the contest. But really failed spectacularly because Freo were able to take advantage of that player that was sort of lost in transition there in Frederick. I guess we had a little chat about this after the game, but from what you saw, what do you think the original intention was with that matchup, and how did it go so wrong?
Yeah, I sat on level 1, so one level up and almost behind the goals, but sort of forward pocket, and had a bird's eye view straight down that wing. So it's pretty easy to work out what was going on. Just before I explain, though, 7 minutes into the game, it's 3-1 to 0, 37 disposals to 9, 10 contested possessions to 4, 7 uncontested marks to 1. So we were just nowhere near it. And they kicked 2 goals of those 3 straight out of the centre bounce. And a lot of that had to do with our wing setup. So Zach Merritt, as you said, started on the wing. And we used him in a role that we've seen, or I've seen Goulden at the Swans play, so sort of starts as a wing, but then rolls into the midfield and really sets up to cut around on that left foot and use his foot skills to come through the centre of the ground, effectively just playing as a midfielder. And then a half forward rolls up to the wing. And in this case, we had Cox starting at half forward and he was rolling up. And that's all well and good if two things. You've got someone at half forward who's got some real leg speed and can get up quickly, but which isn't, Nick Cox, not his fault. And then you're winning the footy. And we weren't doing that. We weren't winning it at the source. And had we been, it would have effectively made Zach Merritt loose through the midfield. That would have caused Fremantle some real headaches. So, to an extent, we've almost played a little bit of Russian roulette, or the football version thereof. But if you're not winning it, it's really, really dangerous. And we weren't. And that was compounded by the fact that the opposition winger was Frederick, a guy who's got some real burst speed, some real, loves getting forward and is a really classy finisher around goal. And you're effectively giving poor Nick Cox or Frederick a 30-metre head start to get forward. And once Freo won the ball, he was on his own, because Zach Merritt's role, basically once the ball gets thrown up, is to forget about his opponent and just go and play as an extra midfielder. So I think we just made it harder on ourselves, an unnecessary complication. And no surprise really that they won contested ball and were able to get 3 goals in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, indeed. And I think the other thing that really stood out about the opening, given the conditions of the day, cold and wet, and the ground was greasy, it was just the way in which they played the conditions much smarter, the way in which they were knocking the ball on, the sort of taps through the air, just sort of forcing it forward. We're going to touch on a bit later how we were collapsing it on the ball, but what they were able to do with that was not even through a disposal, but just get it clear of the congestion into the space where their runners and their good users were, and they really managed to cut us up through that.
Yeah, no, they certainly did. And, I think ultimately what helped them, though, is that they were able to win the ball at the contest. At quarter time, uncontested marks were even. They'd had 36 more disposals, 12 more contested possessions, and intercepts were 17 to 12 their way. 8 of our 12 intercepts were in our own defensive 50. So we were having to start our possession chains deep in our own defence, where ball security becomes pretty important. You don't really just want to sort of knock it on or bang it on the foot and because that adds more risk to what you're trying to do. So again, I think the perception is that they played the conditions smarter than we did. I think the reality was that they were just winning the contest and we're getting field position where they could do that.
Yeah. I think more broadly across the season, the opening of this game really follows a pattern of what we've seen across the season, where we've really started slowly. With about 10 opening quarters, we've only won 1, and there's been numerous opening quarters where we've been completely blasted out of the game. If you think back a couple of weeks back to the Lions clash, you think about the Port clash, where from 5-10 minutes into the game, it's pretty clear that we're non-competitive. I guess, is there anything specific that you can put it down to from what you've seen across the season?
Tricky one to judge from the outside. I feel like a lot of this is likely mental, and that's got to do with coaches and their instructions. I think it's got to do with senior players and their approach to the game. I think tactics come into it as well. Clearly, contest is a big focus for us. Brad Scott talks about it a lot. He talks about it in most press conferences, when it's good or bad. So, a good game against Melbourne and the post-win, he spoke about how our contest was really good and how easier it is to defend when you're winning contest and winning field position. And then he's spoken about it in bad losses where it's let us down. And that's pretty clear to see. And it's a really important facet of the game. And I actually think, despite the changes to the game to speed it up and keep the ball in motion, I still think contest is king and probably more so than ever. And to put some numbers to that, there's about 260 contested possessions in a game. So that's 260 times where the ball is in dispute and one team wins it and the other doesn't. There's about 132 intercepts a game. So teams have 260 opportunities to win a contested ball where it's in dispute, but they're only getting 66 or so intercepts a game, some of which are actually contested, I might add. And then if you look at contested possession differential, there's an outlier at the top and the bottom of that metric. Hawthorn, Carlton, the outlier. Brisbane, St Kilda, Fremantle lead the comp for contested possession differential. Sydney is 7th. And then at the bottom of the rankings for contested possession differential are Collingwood, who are the outlier because they're going okay-ish, and they rank 18th. And then Richmond, West Coast, Essendon and Port Adelaide, 4 of the bottom 5 on the ladder. So there is a real, I guess, reflection of the AFL ladder in what's happening with contested ball. We weren't able to get that right from the start. I don't really know why. I think if you look back to the Port game, we were dominated in the ruck, weren't we? Collingwood game, we were too, although that game was closer at the start and fell away a little bit later on. Brisbane, we were okay in the ruck, but certainly not good at contest. Fremantle, we were thrown a little bit into disarray with Wright going off injured early. Turns out that injury was quite a severe one, but he came back on. Brian took some time, I felt, to warm into the game. So maybe that played a little bit of a part in it, but I think fundamentally when the ball was in dispute, we had overcomplicated tactics going on and handovers. I think that plays a part. We coughed up a couple of goals in a blink of an eye. Wins then knocked out of the sails. Confidence is down. Players start to think a little bit too much about winning the footy. We get that bees to the honeypot that we talk about a lot, and structure goes out the window. And it took us to sort of 5 or 6 minutes into the second quarter to be able to get it back into something that resembled a battle at contest and a bit more of an even ball game.
You're right there. I think you've done a pretty good job of explaining the importance of the contest and the importance of the contest in this game, because if you look at some of the other scoring avenues, scores from turnover were even in this game, and even scores from centre clearance were basically even. But once the ball got into those contests around the ground, once it got to stoppage situations around the ground, the Dockers dominated. So they scored 39 points from stoppage clearances to our 10. And that's despite the overall stoppage clearance numbers being even. And as you say, a lot of it comes down to that beast to the honeypot thing that we speak about a lot, where the Essendon players all sort of collapse in on the ball. The Fremantle players keep their width, they trust. And that has benefits in two ways. Firstly, if they lose the clearance, and gets first hands to the ball, it's sort of got a ring of protection around the clearance so that we can't exit quickly and easily, and therefore that helps explain why we scored so few points from clearance. But then if they win the ball, they've got a range of players on the outside who are free and can get dangerous really quickly. It's a hard. We've talked about this a lot, right? I guess a lot of people talk about it as a matter of structures and understanding what you need to do. I think the players know what they need to do. I think what happens when you're losing is that, you touched on this a little bit before, but the player sort of think like they have to go and make something happen. And so they all sort of feel like they need to go and get the ball, because if they don't do it, someone else isn't going to do it. But then you have the whole team doing that, and that results in what we saw on the weekend with, that clearance structure collapsing in on itself. I'm sure they're not being told to play that way. I'm sure they're not being told to structure up that way. But when you are not performing at the best level and individuals are competitive by nature, it's a lot harder to just hang back and trust your teammates going to win it when the previous examples have suggested that they're not. And that results in what we see with the collapsing in on the ball and the opposition holding their structure.
Yeah, I think it looks like confusion because there's an over-eagerness to go and get the footy. But then you also have that problem compound by having 4 or 5 guys going after the same footy. Then they start to all look at each other and they're confused as to who's going to go for it. And it's not, I don't think it's due to a lack of lack of certainty on what they want or are expected of them. I do think, and I don't think it's a lack of work rate or lack of effort. I think it's just really that lack of, we got punched in the face 3 times really quickly at the start of the game, which, our coaches need to take responsibility for that, because I kind of get the Zach Merritt tactic and why they might have done it and what it could have meant if we won contest. But I reckon the instruction probably needed to be, by the way, Zach, if you're on Frederick on that wing, plans off. Let's make sure we do that handover at the next stoppage, not in free motion and not when the opposition have the ball. And if the coaches did have that conversation with Zach and he didn't follow it through, then he shouldn't be in the side this week. And I doubt that was the case. I think we just got the tactics wrong. But I do think just on the bit about turnover, mate, we defended turnover a lot better, and that is a tick from the game. We had 25 turnovers in our forward half. The league average is 20. Sydney and Gold Coast lead the competition with 27. And I think from memory, we had a similar number. It might have been exactly the same the week before. So 2 weeks in a row, we've won the ball back from our opposition in our forward half of the ground. An elite level right up there with the very best in the competition. And the Swans are obviously on top of the ladder and taking all before them at the moment. So when people are saying that they're confused about what Essendon's game plan is and what they're trying to do, I actually get confused when they say it, because I think it's pretty easy to see. It's just that the execution isn't there often enough, and it's been very much boom or bust. We get it right, it looks great, but it only takes little things, a drop in confidence, a drop in concentration, a senior leader who's not prepared to work hard enough, a young player who's not quite able to keep switched on for 120 minutes. And in the case on Sunday, first quarter, where we just didn't get our hands on the footy at the contest, and then it all falls apart. But I really do think it's, we bank that win of what we've been able to do the last 2 weeks in winning the ball back in our own forward half. And I think, fundamentally, in this case, we gave up those 2 early centre bounce goals. It feels like that was it for the game, mind you. So at least we stopped that damage there. It was 4-2 to 2 behinds from ball ups, where the damage was really done, plus a couple of goals from kick-ins. But we also had Setterfield out on the wing. So I feel like we probably had an opportunity to tighten that up, but we let it go. So I guess I've rambled a lot there, mate, but I don't think it was all bad in the game, and very rarely is it truly the case.
You're right, and that's one of my pet peeves with AFL media when I feel like it's a really lazy analysis to say you don't know what their game plan is or what their structure is, especially when a team's performing badly, because as you say, it's as much about execution as it is the other aspects of the actual plan. And I think we've seen on multiple occasions this year what a good Essendon side is looking like. It's just that being so young and with the senior leaders of the side not always performing at the level you would expect them to, we can't execute that game plan as much as you want. And that also doesn't take into account that you're coming up against an opposition that's also trying to execute a game plan. And we came up against a quality opposition on the weekend. I think another thing that stood out for me for the game was the fact that if you look at the raw number of scoring shots for the game, we were creating opportunities. The problem was that for most of them, they were low quality shots. I think we had about 5 shots from inside 40 metres for the whole day, and most of those were in the last quarter. I think in the first half, really the only shot that was relatively close to goal was Archie Wick's one around the corner, which he wasn't able to convert. So if you're taking all your shots from outside 40 on a wet day, that's not a recipe for success. And part of that was down to how well Fremantle were able to defend our entries. But if you go into the numbers again, the surprising thing was that we were able to, we were able to take more marks inside 50 than they did, and we had more forward 50 ground ball gets with less inside 50 than the Dockers. We were talking last week in the Giants game, one of the things that let us down there was we weren't winning those ground balls with our weight of numbers of inside 50s. So we're actually able to do that against the Dockers, but we weren't able to take any advantage from that.
Yeah, Fremantle, though, did hit some of their low percentage shots too, which probably compounded the result. I mean, yeah, they certainly had their share of gimme goals, and we missed a couple, or not missed opportunity. We coughed up some opportunities where they were able to get shots from the goal square, but I think they were 15 points or plus 15 on expected score. We were minus 2.5 points, so it did give a little bit of a swing to their advantage. But again, we gave them a 3-goal head start before we got our hands on the ball. Take that off, we still lose the game by 4.5 goals or so, but we're probably commended during the week for taking it up to one of the informed sides of the competition. But you can't erase that from the game. It happened, it was real, it was ugly. We made it harder for ourselves. After that, the game was, there or thereabouts.
Yeah. And you're right. In the second half, we were much better, particularly in around the contest. We were plus 18 in contested ball in the second half, plus 17 in ground ball gets, and plus 9 in forward 50 ground ball gets. So there's been a lot of talk about how the game didn't blow out and we sort of kept ourselves, with not a disastrous result in terms of the scoreboard. Can you put that down Can you take anything out of that second half, or is that simply the result of the opposition putting the Q in the rack? I did note in our long news press conference that there were suggestions that the Fremantle players were unhappy that they didn't win by 100 points. So it does, from that perspective, potentially they were trying to, really run up the score, and we didn't let them do that. It's really small consolation given the overall result and the way we played in the first half. But if you take that at face value, then potentially there is some small victory there.
Yeah, I think we got better from the second quarter. We still started the second quarter a little slow, but sort of from the 5-minute mark onwards, through to halftime, contested ball was 19-23, disposals 71-76. Ground balls 15-16 in that period. So, relatively even. Fremantle still a little bit ahead. But it was also 4-1 to 5 behinds our way. So both teams had 5 scoring shots, but they were able to increase the margin because they made the most of theirs and we didn't make the most of ours. But yeah, I think you do have to take something out of the game, don't you? I think it would be a miss if we didn't. Fremantle probably did drop off, but I also thought we got better in the game. I think it demonstrates the value of contest, balance of contest, keeping shape and structure around the footy. I think if you get that right, you get rewards. If you don't, you get blown open. And I think anytime you can review the same game and from within that game show players the difference between what good and bad looks like, I think you need to do it. I think we got the opportunity to see the impact that Sullivan Roby can have. You and I have spoken about the lack of match winners on our list. And can you imagine Sullivan Roby having that sort of impact on a game of footy when we're a much more seasoned and consistent team and that game starts in a much more competitive sense and the games, we're down by a goal instead of 7 goals and he's able to go in and have that impact like that. That's something that we should really take out of this game and think, you know what, the pieces are there. There's a few missing, but we're adding some pieces that we didn't have, and the future can be really, really exciting. Also knowing that we've got Nick Martin out at the moment, who's probably our best or second best player. I think most people would have Jordan Ridley in our top 5 as well. So and there's some pieces missing. Dyson Sharp's only a first year player, but already showing that he's an important part. So we're missing some quality ourselves. And yeah, I think the other thing too, mate, for me, the bit that I actually really took out of it, really, really liked, is the last goal. We grinded for 3 minutes. The game was over. Speak about Fremantle putting the Q in the rack. We could have too. We could have waved the white flag, rolled over and let this game just disappear and lose by 100 just through a lack of effort. But in that last 3 minutes, we intercepted their exits from defensive 50 3 times in a row. We put them under real pressure. We won 7 contested possessions to 4, and we kicked that last goal on the siren. It's only a small mercy, but I really liked that we fought the game out to the end, and we were prepared to. Would have liked it from the start, of course, and I'm not dismissing that, but I do like that right to the very end we were prepared to put our body on the line and really fight the game out.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Well, look, let's move on, and we've got another nomination for the Damien Barrett Award, and this man who's nominated today has popped up on the outskirts of the Damien Barrett Award a couple of times this season, but he's finally managed to snag himself a nomination. Chief football writer Jay Clark has outdone himself with his article on Monday, where he points to the win over Collingwood in 2024 as sort of the fulcrum point in which Essendon's fortunes have shifted. Points to that article, after which Essendon was in the top 4. I think we won 11 games for the season, and I think with about 6 or 7 rounds to go. It was after that game that Craig Vozzo really led the push to follow Matt Rose's plan to fully rebuild the list, whereas Adrian Dodoro, who was still at the club at the time, wanted to double down on what was already there. The article indicating that he wanted to keep Sam Draper, he wanted to go hard for Harry Perryman as a free agent, and then really also go hard at getting Harley Reid from West Coast, and this is after Harley Reid's first year in 2024. When Dodoro didn't get his way and Vozzo and Rosa, Vozzo went with the Rosa plan, he supposedly walked away from the club, and it's because of that particular decision that we are in the position we're in now. So that was Jay Clark's thesis. But look, saying Dodoro walked away from Essendon is on the level of Stalin airbrushing Trotsky out of photos propaganda from Jay. Not sure how many people walk away from a club while suing them for wrongful dismissal. And look, even blind Freddie could see Jay Clark was where Jay Clark was getting his info from with the heroes and villains of the way this article is framed. So look, well done, Jay. You are finally relevant. You've received your first Damien Barrett nomination.
Firstly, I'm staggered that this is his first nomination. I haven't been keeping an eye on the leaderboard, but that surprises me. But I don't proclaim to be a journalist, and I would expect that being the chief football writer of the biggest newspaper in the Victoria, where 10 of the clubs are and where there's sports at its biggest, that research would play a little bit in that role. And it took me about 3 seconds to do a Google search. And I found that on the 12th of November 2024, Essendon had reached a settlement with departed list management Adrian Dodoro after a hearing at the Fair Work Commission, which tells me that that he didn't simply just walk away, because I wouldn't. I mean, I'm not only am I not a journalist, Humey, I'm also not a employment relations lawyer, so I don't completely have my head around fair work policies. But I would have thought that if someone has walked away from a job, i.e. resigned, that those cases don't end up at the Fair Work Commission. So, yeah, it certainly did leave me scratching my head, wondering where Jay did get his information from.
Yes, it's a mystery, quote unquote. Look, let's examine the context of the claim that, from the point we were at in that season, we could have topped up the list and had a real crack. So after we beat Collingwood in that game, we were in the top 4 with 7 rounds to go. So most teams from there would expect to make finals. If you look a little bit closer, we were there with a percentage of 99.9%. And at that time of the season, there were only 5 other teams at that point that had worse percentages. Of all the teams that would go on to make the 8 that year, we only beat Hawthorn, and this was Hawthorn in round 1. They took them 5 rounds before they became the Hawthorn that we know today. They were still sort of finding their feet. Beat the Bulldogs, and we beat the Giants, who both sort of finished at the bottom end of the ladder. We lost all our games against the top 3 sides comfortably. So to that point, we'd really been getting over the line in some close games. And then in the back end of the season, that luck deserted us. We had the Adelaide game where I think Rochelle kicked the goal just before the end, and we had the Gold Coast game with Mac Andrew after the siren. And we were winning those games at the beginning of the year. Think about Sam Draper diving on top of the ball over at the Adelaide Oval. So we'd had a bit of luck to be in the position that we were in at that time. We beat Collingwood, and then the luck sort of deserted us, and that ultimately saw us miss finals that year. And look, I'm sure if you go back and listen to the episodes from around that time, I'm sure I was pretty positive about how we were going to that point. It's my nature to be optimistic. I tend to look on the bright side. So it might have been that at the time I was overlooking the signs, but to look at it back at it now, knowing what we know, the reality was that we were not really anywhere near competing with the best sides. And I think the club made the right call to go in the path that they have.
I went back and had a look at some of our running sheets and match reviews and season review across the end of that season, mate. And we did speak about a lack of A-grade talent, a lack of quality ball users and speed, a lack of genuine small forwards, a lack of midfield firepower. We also spoke at various times about our senior leaders not always being able to stand up consistently for us. So whilst I'm sure we're optimistic, because we're both like that, I think we're also pretty clear in what our list needed. And in fact, our primary assessment was that we'd raised our floor but not our ceiling by virtue of the changes that we'd made in bringing in some free agents the year before, which was another way of saying that our list was very much stuck in the middle, and that we should look to, and I think we also mentioned at the time, we should look to trade some senior players out to maximise our draft hands. I think, whilst being optimistic, we weren't blind to the work that needed to be done and is now being done.
Yeah. And let's take the counterfactual and say the Bombers agreed to go with Dodoro's plan as it stated in the article. I certainly, for much of 2024, I think up until probably about a bit over halfway through the year, I was keen to have a real hard go for getting Harley Reid across after the year. And that was because of what you touched on there, that we lacked elite talent. We know the draft can be hit and miss. And it was clear from his first few games that Harley Reid was going to be an absolute jet. So let's say in this situation, we convinced him to come to Essendon at the end of 2024. At that point, he's still contracted for 2 more years. In order to get that deal done, it probably would have required the biggest trade haul in history to get it done. We would have probably had to give up all our top-end picks from 2024 and 2025 to get this done. So you think about what the flow-on effects of that are. That means no Kako, no Roby, no Farrow, no Sharp. Individually, Harley Reid is almost certainly going to be a better individual player than all those guys. I know we like our players and they've got the top end, but I think Harley Reid, if you were going to pick one of those 5 players to be the best, Harley Reid would be the one at the moment. But would his individual impact be bigger than all 4 of those together? It's too early to say how successful those 4 are going to be. At this stage, you'd rather have all 4 of those players than just the one. And if it goes through that, you're then betting it all on the 2024 squad plus Harley Reid and Harry Perriman to become a premiership contender in the next 2 or 3 years. Because if you're wrong, Tasmania's coming in to take away the possibility of rebuilding through the draft for a significant period of time for any other club. Now, there's obviously a chance that Dodoro's plan could have worked, but you're making a massive gamble, spending millions on a Reid contract. You're probably paying him. He's probably the first $2 million player if you can convince him to come back. You're keeping Draper's contract. You've got to pay him as well. You've got to pay overs to get Perriman to choose Essendon. You'd essentially have no salary cap flexibility from that point on to make moves. I guess the one thing in the article I will give Jay credit for is that, unlike the namesake of this award, he's actually used sliding doors in its proper context.
Yeah, well put. I think the thing that changed a lot of this also was not just our own performance, but the realisation, and I know that the Tassie licence got announced, I think, at the end of 2023. So we played the 2024 season knowing about that, but the realism of that coming and when they were coming and the talk and suggestions of what their package was going to be in terms of access to draft and otherwise also came into it. It was a significant part of the decision that the club made to go and invest in the draft, because we knew that we had one way to go. It was one way or the other. We either top up and try and win a flag now, and Perriman, good player. I was big on him, keen on him, free agent, but he's not not on his own. He doesn't turn the dial for us. Harley Reid wouldn't have done that pre-Tassie either. He might have helped us get to there, by the time Tassie's in the competition. But yeah, he wouldn't have given us depth of young talent ahead of Tasmania coming into the draft and cannibalising the early parts of it. Had that plan not worked, we were giving ourselves one shot at the stumps. And yeah, I mean, why would you have confidence that sort of strategy would work when we tried that 2 or 3 times over the journey and it had failed? So yeah, I think you've summed it up pretty well, mate.
Speaking of more media shenanigans, Jimmy's certainly were rustled for some when it was announced that former CEO Craig Vozzo, in his role as a club consultant, was being tasked with looking at the best practice of other clubs aimed at enhancing Essendon's football department structure, particularly around player development. So on the surface, I like that they're continually looking to improve the behind the scenes of the club. It obviously has improved, maybe not obviously, but I think the focus and the way the club is talking about the football department has certainly improved a lot in the past few years. But that doesn't mean the job is done. And I also think it's a good sign that Tim Roberts is expanding on his own knowledge. He's obviously experienced in business, but not in running a football club or a football department. So for him, getting as wide a range of knowledge and experience as he can is going to be really important for him to make the best choices for the club. But many in the media have latched onto it as another way of suggesting the club is in crisis. So, Jono, what's your take?
I really don't know why this has blown up to be a big story. I think, some of the carry on.
It's got Essendon in it. I think, any Essendon story at the moment is a big story.
Yeah. And I guess, it was first reported by Cal Toomey. I think Craig Vozzo staying involved at the club wasn't new news. That was mentioned at the time that he stepped away as CEO. I think there was probably a faction of people that saw or thought that maybe it was Andrew Welsh breaking down the house that Dave Barham built, and maybe a move towards bringing back the likes of James Hird, etc., back into the club. And perhaps that's why it's attracted some attention, because this sort of counters that theory, I guess. But we've got coaches coming out of contract at the end of this year, assistant coaches, that is, and football department people. The soft cap has increased this year. It increases again next year. We've got an increased load, all clubs do, around AFLW programs now, which is a great thing for the game and a great thing for our women's team as well and women's program. But it's still an additional workload and an additional resource needs to go into it. We've over recent years invested heavily in recruiting and development resources, certainly comparative to what they were previously. There's also a new team coming in that's going to add an extra complication. We've got a really young list that could quite possibly get younger again next year, depending on which direction we go in terms of player retention and maybe trading some players out. So the need to have the right resources or development resources goes up another gear. There's also the changes that the AFL have made around psychologists. We already have a full-time psychologist in our football department, which would be, I assume, taking a fair chunk of our soft cap. So the AFL changes around that have another impact on what we can do and the money that we have to spend. So I think this is just about making sure that we have the right people in the right roles going into 2027. And we've also got the benefit of having someone the caliber of Craig Vozzo to help us do that when, as you touched on, Tim Roberts, our new CEO, doesn't have a lot of football experience. Well, certainly doesn't, other than being a board member for a couple of years, doesn't have the experience of managing a football club. So, he'll be a great corporate CEO. I think he's someone that ultimately will really embed himself with the fans, and he wears, his red and black heart on his sleeve. But yeah, I can't understand how this is perceived as anything other than positive. And the sort of moving away from that discussion for a sec, Humey, indulge me if you don't mind, but the overinflated views on this being a full-blown shake-up are just incredible. I have to admit that I'm at a point now where I'm pretty much done with the game. Not Essendon, not my love for the club, and not my love and passion for doing this, Humey, and the community that we've got around us. So, that gets me excited. I love going to the footy every week. I love catching up with fellow Essendon fans and talking about our club. And, I still watch our games every week. I go every week. I'll watch our opposition, each week, and also, most weeks the team we play 2 weeks out. But beyond that, I'm pretty done with the way the game is run at the moment. I'm done with the AFL media and the way that they carry on. That have pretty much ruined the game as a whole for me. The combine, you add that to the quality or lack of quality in the broadcast, the tight camera angles, the lack of knowledge and insights in the commentary. I actually find the whole game now, and this has got absolutely nothing to do with Essendon and our performances and how we're going, but I find the whole game exhausting. I've just about had enough of it all.
It's a little bit of cooking the golden goose, really, isn't it? It's being flogged into the ground, and you just can't get away from it, and everyone feels like they have to say something controversial or push the envelope, or not really engage in any nuance with the way in which they approach things. Everything's either the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever. And the thing switches from week to week. A team wins and it's all roses, isn't it? Or a team loses and suddenly it's a catastrophe. It's no long term. There are exceptions, obviously. I think some of the former coaches that we've had join the media are always worth listening to. Obviously, Ken Hinkley and I think Adam Simpson have been really good additions because they're not sensationalists or haven't been sensationalised yet by the media. I think it's probably because they could sort of walk into another job wherever they wanted, given their experience. And so they don't feel like they have to play the same games as the rest of the media who, they probably couldn't get much work anywhere else. So they don't feel like they have to play that way. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we have a bit of fun with the Barrett Award because I think we were all just sick of some of the terrible takes. But you're right. It's just endless. I'm choosing to engage with it, which is probably a mistake. Yeah, well, I don't think we can fix it in a 1 and a bit hour podcast, and I don't think we should try, and we'll just stay in our lane and do our stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my only solution is I just tune out from all of it. Which is a shame because I mean I love the game. I've always been passionate about it. I've been lucky enough to work in it both at club level and in a commercial aspect, and it's completely fried me. It's ridiculous. But we have had some good news this week, mate. It dropped today. We will move on. We had a contract announcement.
Yeah, indeed. I don't think it was a surprise to anyone. I think most people expected this player to receive a new deal, and Lewis Hayes has got a two-year contract now, extending him to 2027. Obviously, his terrible ACL injury coming at the worst time. He finally achieved his goal and made his AFL debut and was performing really well. We've just seen him miss a year in which he, if he was fit, it would be really interesting to see what our team makeup looks like. He is only a week away from resuming in the VFL, so that'll be really exciting, not just for him, but for the fans and for the club as well next week. And give him a couple of weeks to get up to speed at the VFL, and we could see him back at the AFL level soon. So really exciting there, especially with talk that maybe Jordan Ridley could leave. I think Lewis Hayes has some attributes which could be a Jordan Ridley replacement if he gets back, if he sort of progresses into what we what we were seeing from him in the VFL and that short stint in the AFL.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's a class actor. I guess the 1 year deal gives him confidence going into next year that he's got a place, and then also gives him an opportunity to earn an extension. I think his manager's probably advised him well there that, yeah, there's an opportunity, moving into the Tassie years to earn a bigger and better salary and longer tenure. So I think that's a good outcome for player and club.
You know what I've done? I've thought we're still in 2025 and thought it was a 2 year deal, not a 1 year. I saw 2027 and just automatically calculated as 2 years. It shows where my head's at. I'm going to blame the media for frazzling my brain. Moving on, the Hayes contract is good news, and him coming back soon is good news. But it seems we really can't go a week at the moment without more bad news on the injury front. You touched on this earlier with Peter Wright going down with a knee injury that he sustained early on in the clash with the Dockers. He did manage to play through it for the rest of the game, but it does look like now he could be out for anywhere for a couple of weeks to a couple of months. And it's such a shame given how good a year he was having. I know he won the Crichton as a forward in 2022, but I think he was on track for a career best year, given his impact around the ground while still being a forward threat. It does mean that it is a big opportunity here for Nick Bryan to stamp himself as the number one ruck, though. He has shown some positive signs since coming back into the side, but we're really going to need him to step up to become what you all hope he will be, especially, more bad injury news with Vigo having a reoccurrence of a hamstring injury that's going to see him out for a period of time as well.
Yeah, no, it definitely can't take a trick at the moment, can we, with those kinds of things? Peter Wright, probably top three at our best and fairest at the moment. I think, arguably one or two. And we haven't really seen Nick play more than sort of 50 or 60% of game time. So, yeah, fortunate that Nick is back. We get to see him, really put his hand up now and what he's made of, which is good. But, terrible news for Peter Wright. I think he'd really turned a corner with form and confidence. And, not only was he rucking well, he was hitting the scoreboard regularly as well and had found his set shot again after losing it last year. So, yeah, I'm pretty disappointed for him, to be honest, because I think he was winning a lot of people over.
Yes, and it's also now been confirmed that Braden Fiorini will be out for the rest of the year with a back injury. We clearly got him into player role. I think we were, excited that we could almost have him as a set and forget player on the wing, but he's been able to contribute much on the field because of this ongoing issue. But what it has done is given us the ability to take someone in the mid-season draft, and depending on the result of this game, we'll pick one or two. So I guess it's hard to know who's available in the mid-season draft. There are some guides that are out there now, but I guess in the mid-season draft, do you pick for a particular list need, or do you just take the best available pick? I mean, if you're talking about list needs, I think for me, the one thing I'd be looking for is someone with genuine speed, if possible. I think it's something we really lack at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm not sure there's a lot of that quality in the mid-season draft. There's probably one, Nick Staropoli from the Cannons. He's played in our VFL as well recently. He might be the exception, but he does have some good wheels. He's a 190 centimetre intercepting running defender, but he doesn't have that real line-breaking speed that I suspect you're after here, Humey, and we need. So I think we probably just go best available, which might end up being Nick anyway. He's right at the top of the potential mid-season draft board. So yeah, it might fall that way. We tick a box, but I don't think and a lot of people will be looking for small forwards. Doesn't seem to me that there's any real quality options there anyway. So yeah, I think we just take what we can get and see whether they can put the pressure on someone who's not performing at a senior level and give us an option for the future.
Yes. Well, look, it's been a fair show. So we're finally getting to look at our opponents this week for what's been dubbed the Harry Van Hatten Cup in the Tigers. So after many people expected the Tigers to go winless in 2025, they actually surprised by winning 5 games for the year, including that famous win against Carlton, although that still saw them finish in 17th position. So far in 2026, the Tigers are sitting at 1 win and 9 losses, with the 1 win coming against the Eagles in Perth, and they're sitting in 18th spot with a percentage of 60.9. So I'm going to go through their numbers as we usually do, but most of them are going to be at the bottom end of the rankings given their ladder position. As you'd expect from a team that finished down the bottom, they had the least effective offence both last year and this year, averaging 65.7 points for this year, which is 2 points higher than last year, but we are in a higher scoring year than the previous year. They're also conceding 12 more points per game this year with 105 against, 10 more inside 50s per game this year, the worst in the comp, although that's we're the second worst, and we're conceding 9 more inside 50s per game than our opponents. Plus, last year, the defence was reasonable at stopping opposition scores. They averaged a score on 49% of entries against, which was the 10th best in the comp. That's dropped away this year to 56%, which is, again, equal with the Bombers this year. And they're playing in a fairly similar style. They're averaging 1.38 kicks per handball, which is mid-table for the league.
Yeah, look, it's hard to really take a lot out of their season to date, given the struggles that they've had with injuries. I mean, we saw it in our case last year, but they've really had it from the get-go. They're ranked 10th for average age and average experience, just below us. So it was always going to be a bit of a tough year for them regardless, but they've been really clear on what their list strategy is. But injuries have made that all the more harder. So I think whilst both teams are 1 and 9, they're 25 points below the AFL average for points for. We're 10 behind. And whilst they're going 6 games or 6 points a game better than us for points against, they have played the other 3 teams in the bottom 4 as well. So it's probably helped protect them a little bit in terms of scoreboard damage against. This is our first outing against a bottom 4 team. Like, talk about having a bit of a tough draw. You know, with young list for us, we knew that it was going to be a tough start to the year. To get to round 11 before you play a bottom 4 team is, been a bit of a sucker punch.
Yeah. Back on the Tigers, despite missing captain and number 1 ruck Toby Naylor so much for the year, they've actually improved their centre bounce and stoppage clearance differentials, going from minus 1.57 to minus 1.3 at centre bounce and minus 3 to minus 2.3 per game at stoppage. So small improvements, which you wouldn't have expected with Nankervis out. Their scores from centre bounce have increased by 3 points per game, just over 10. Their scores from stoppage have dropped by 2 points, although that could be explained partly by the reduction in throw-ins because of the lasso rule. They've dropped away in their contested ball work, though, going from minus 7.3 to minus 10.7 per game, although their ground ball has improved slightly from minus 4.9 to minus 3.3.
Yeah, they concede more points from clearance. That's centre clearance and stoppage clearance combined than any other team in the comp, 44.9 points a game. We're 16th, conceding 41.5. They're 14th in the AFL for first possession wins at clearance. We're 17th, but they're 17th at converting a first possession win into a clearance at just 69% of the time. We're 6th at 75.4. So whilst they're a little bit better at us at getting their hands on it first, they do get stripped a lot, whereas when we do get our hands on it, we're generally able to then go on and get a clearance from it. And we've played some teams lately, Brisbane, Freo, Giants, that are good at turning first possession to a clearance and getting forward. It's not something the Tigers have been great at. This is an area where I think we would really expect to expose them. And as a result of not being able to get that or turning first possession into a clearance, they're 18th for time in forward half, although it must be said, we're 17th, but we've been having some of those problems as well.
Yeah. And part of the reason why they've struggled with that is they've struggled to get the ball off their opponents. They're conceding nearly 18 more marks per game, whilst on average they're down 4.2 marks per inside 50 compared to their opponents. And another aspect of their game that's actually dropped away from last year is their interceptability. They've gone from minus 3.5 to minus 6.6 intercepts per game, and they're only scoring 36 points per game from this source, the second lowest in the competition.
Yeah, as you said, 17th in the AFL. First scores from turnover, we're 13th, which is an improvement for us on where we were at last year, scoring 9.7 points more than Richmond per game from that source. They're 4 points a game better at defending scores on turnover, but again, they've had an opportunity to play some lower-ranked teams. They concede the 5th most intercepts in the AFL, win the 3rd least, and rank 18th for time in possession. So, as you'd expect for the team that's had all of those injuries, they're ranking down the bottom in some pretty critical metrics. And I think also, as you expect, Humey, to throw over to you, for a team that finished down near the bottom last year, there was a fair bit of this turnover.
Yeah, not quite as much as the year before. They did their big cull in 2024. They still made 7 changes in 2025. Tyler Young was traded to West Coast. He played 7 games last year, and then they had 6 others who were delisted, including 2-time premiership player Camden McIntosh, having played 23. Joining McIntosh was former Hawk Jake Kaczynski after 2 games, Thompson Dow 11, Jacob Bauer 5, and Jacob Blight 7. So they lost a little bit of players who done some things for them in 2025, but only McIntosh was really the one that had a big impact on their year last year. The Tigers traded in Patrick Rechko from Geelong. He's played 5 games so far this year. After fleecing North's future first in the 2024 draft, the Tigers were able to take consecutive top 10 selections in Sam Cumming and Sam Grill. They've played 4 and 9 games respectively. Pick 31, Zane Puka is yet to debut. 54, Noah Roberts-Thompson, he's played 1 game. And finally, SSP selection, Tom Burton has played 4 games this year.
Yeah, Rutchenko's played the last 5 games and will play again this week. He's taken that role that McIntosh vacated on the wing. We'll see Sam Cumming tomorrow night. He's a really explosive midfielder. Sam Grill's a hard-running, speedy halfback. So those 2 guys went with the 2 picks before our 2. Noah Roberts-Thompson will play his 2nd game. He's a sort of mid-forward, probably play more forward than mid, I expect, and has some real speed. And the Tigers have been really keen to inject some speed and run into their team. And then Tom Burton's another sort of medium forward around the 178, 179 centimetre mark. Should we move on to selection, mate? It was 4 changes for us.
Yeah, 1 force with Peter Wright going out, and then 3 others were omitted in Cox, Setterfield and Ewan. In comes Guelphy, Gresham, Edwards and Mackay. Mackay with Blackerson, or with Wright going out, it does look like Blackerson will move into the ruck, and then Mackay will play as that key back. It'll probably play on a fair bit on Tom Lynch, you would imagine. Really interesting that we've gone with a very much more senior side that we have this year. Obviously bringing in Gresham and Guelphy there does bump the average age up and the average experience. So we're certainly, with the way in which the side's been selected, you certainly can't say that we're trying to tank this game. I think we're definitely sensing a win and think if we get some experienced heads in, that's going to give us the best chance of winning this game.
Yeah, I guess counter to that is Wright and albeit forced and Setterfield would be among the more senior players in terms of age on our list, I would imagine. So it probably doesn't change all that much, I wouldn't think. Edwards is a little bit older, but inexperienced. Probably does lean a few extra games there. But yeah, Cox and Setterfield out, I think it makes sense. What doesn't make sense, actually, is Setterfield playing last week on a wing. You and I certainly was in favour of that selection last week, the expectation that he play in the midfield. They play him on the wing and then drop him this week. I didn't think he was all that bad. And bring Guelphy in, who has been playing on the wing at VFL level. So it'll be interesting to see where he plays. But you and I have spoken that, we sort of suspect that over the years, Brad Scott has used the wing role for sort of guys on their way out to just hold up a role. You sort of think of Snelling in his first year. There was Jake Kelly played there, even Lual last year. It doesn't seem to want to move young players out of their other positions. We could play Farrow there or someone else, but
Daywicks has had a crack there a little bit, so there is some players going through there.
True. But and now back into his chosen position, and rightly so. And let's hope that's the case on Friday night. Jaden Ewan's a bit stiff. He's been working hard, but he's struggling for impact. He's not really able to find ground balls, which we need a small forward to be able to do. Gresham is better at that when we get the good version of Jay Gresham, so hopefully we get that again this week. Mackay's an interesting one, given that he got dropped, played 1 VFL game. VFL then had a bye. I wonder, had Wright not got injured and therefore Blackiston not needed to ruck, and I guess Vigo also getting injured means we couldn't bring him in either as a second ruck. I wonder whether we might have seen him in the VFL for another week had that not been the case. But yeah, you probably don't want Blackiston as your second defender and then having to rotate through the ruck as well. It would have been a lot to ask.
Yeah. On to the Tigers, and they've made 2 changes with Lafau and Alger coming in. Out goes Campbell Gray injured and Liam Fawcett, who is omitted. And I think given their injury list, you'd feel pretty stiff if you've been omitted from the Tigers at the moment. But I think I've liked what I've seen of Lafau so far this year. I think he's been doing some nice things as a forward. Obviously, they've got Tom Lynch there as that key pillar, but I think he provides a good foil to Lynch. He's a different kind of player, gives the Tigers another target to kick to so that they're not Lynch-centric. So I think they are a better side this week because he's in there.
Yeah, definitely. He gives them some structure. He's also a good contested mark. He's played well against us in the past. Alger's a medium forward, played 5 games so far. He's another one who has some real speed. He's pretty classy around goals as well. So I think, structurally their tall forwards look quite sound, and then they've got some real speed at the drop of the ball and around ground level that we're going to have to be pretty wary about.
Yeah, well, look, let's get into the match tactics. And I think it's hard to really sort of analyse the performance of an 18th side. The 18th for a reason. There's a lot that's going wrong for them. But I think the one thing that has stood out for me watching the Tigers games these past few weeks is that despite the injury list they've really shown a fair bit of pluck and grit. There's been a lot of gutsy performances and took it up to some good sides at periods of games. They had the Adelaide clash when they were in front at half time, and Adelaide's quality got them over the line. The Saints last week jumped them. They just kept sort of fighting their way back to a point where you thought they might be able to challenge, and the Saints were able to keep them at arm's length, but they certainly weren't blown out. And then they were able to beat West Coast over there, which, given what we saw last week, is not necessarily an easy thing for people to do. So again, they are an 18 side for a reason, but they certainly shouldn't be underestimated.
No, that's right. And, there's nothing to suggest that this is going to be an easy game. They still have some real quality out there. Broad, Voston, Lynch, Short. They might not be at their best anymore, but they're still very capable, very experienced leaders. And it's a real blessing, I guess, for their young group and first-year players to come in and play alongside those guys who have been there and done it. Noah Bolter is now curfew-free and able to play night games and playing some really good footy in the ruck as well. And the ruck rules suit him. He's got size and strength, but also real agility. And then Ross and Taranto have been quite consistent this year. And then you add some really exciting kids coming through, including their two, first-round draft picks from last year. They've got some talent across the park.
Yeah. I think the other thing that stood out from the last couple of weeks watching Richmond play is that they've been going at above their season average for marks and have been trying to control the ball a little bit more than they were able to do in the early season, although a lot of that is their backs getting high number of marks. Is this the sort of game style where we should be letting them to let them do that and then sort of fold back and let them come to us? Or do we push up to try and deny this play style for them?
No, I think we have to push up and deny. I think this is the week where, build on what we've done the last 2 weeks, where we've had 25 forward half intercepts the last 2 weeks. Over the last 5 weeks, the AFL average has been 40.7 points per game from forward half chains. Richmond has conceded 58, which is the 18th in the AFL. We've conceded 45. They're leaking scores from turnovers in their own defensive half, and no team has had the ball in their forward half less. So whilst they've been trying to get a little bit more ball control and protect things a little bit, they still do cough it up under pressure, and we want to make sure that. And, that's probably part of the reason why Guelphy's been brought back into this side, because we know that he can spark that, and bring other players into the game through doing it as well, and those defensive actions. So, I'd certainly be all for wanting to press up and win the footy back off them. I think that's where we can really hurt them, because we've been able to do it the last 2 weeks against teams that are better than Richmond. We should be really trying to dominate them in that part of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Even with their injuries, though, there are still players from the Tigers who could take the game away from us. So I guess who do we really need to focus on to ensure they don't have a big impact on Friday night?
Yeah, they have dangerous forwards, mate, talls and smalls. I touched on that when we were speaking about selection. It's really well balanced, also not just in sizes and attributes, but also experience and youth. They can get you in the air and they can get you at ground level. And we have a back line that has been battled for confidence. I thought, and touch wood, it is the case that Zach Reid really turned a corner last week, and we started to see some of his best attributes shine, particularly after half-time. But I think ultimately this game is going to be about supply. So spoken already about wanting to press up and play a forward half game. You can only do that if you're winning contest and clearance. Taranto's their number one player for first possession and clearance. We don't want him to have a big game. They have some guys that can hurt on the outside, but we need to prevent Taranto and also Jack Ross, who's been having a pretty consistent year, from winning the contested battle. And I think the game is ultimately going to be decided there. And then, the other thing that's obviously worth noting is they have Broad and Voston and their ability to intercept. Those guys have hurt us a number of times over the years. So I think the Edwards inclusion is a really important one. Let's hope we see him as a forward with Nate Caddy and Archer May, because that forward line gave us some real balance of tools, and that all three of them are really good at getting out of one another's way. So if they can keep Broad and Voston accountable, then I think that really helps us too.
Yeah, and I guess on the flip side, what do we have to watch out for the Tigers trying to restrict us in any way? What are they going to try and take away from us?
Yeah, I think they'll be wanting the same thing, mate. They'll want to win contests, they'll want to win territory, and they'll want to deny us uncontested marks. And the best way to deny us uncontested marks is to deny us to win the ball in the first place and get it to the outside. So I think both coaches will be going with a pretty similar approach here, and that's putting a lot of focus on getting the contest right.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for us. Thanks to everyone who's listened along. Get along to the G tomorrow night if you can make it. It's always a fabulous celebration of Australian football and Australian culture. before we close out, club has been thrown a lot. Had a lot thrown at it. Before we close, club's had a lot thrown at it this week. It's had a lot thrown at it most weeks over recent years. And probably this week, unlike anything I've ever seen before, it feels like it's even over and beyond what we had to endure during the saga years. There's been a lot of mudslinging and a lot of real crap said about us. And I don't think that's helped by people who have had their chance at the club airing their dirty laundry to the media. I don't think the fans deserve it, and they're the ones that are really hurting in all of this. The players and the coaches are paid a lot of money to do what they do, and I know at times even the vitriol that's shared or aimed at them is over and above. But the fans are loyal, they're passionate, they pay their money, they support their team, and don't deserve to be on the receiving end of any of that. And those that are in charge at the club don't deserve it either. They deserve clear air to be able to make the decisions that they need to make for the betterment of this football club going forward. And this is really tough what we're going through at the moment, the wins and losses, but also what's being thrown at us. And we do need to get through it together. We need to get to the other side together. So get to the game if you can, grab your scarf, cheer these young blokes on because they're desperate to drive our club forward. And don't let anyone take this club away from you. It's worth fighting for. So stick fat. Stay on board and let's get along to the G and cheer on these young fellas and make some noise tomorrow night. That's it from us. As always, stay safe and go Dons.